The final notice was printed on bright yellow paper, like the state wanted to make sure I could see my life ending from across the room. I held it in my shaking hands, the arthritis in my grip making the paper crinkle like dry leaves. 72 years old, a career as a civil engineer, and here I was, standing in my father's old workshop, staring at a tax bill that looked more like a phone number. "Hey, Julian!" my brother Arthur shouted from the living room. I could hear the TV blaring some game show. "You going past the gas station later? I'm out of smokes." He didn't ask how my heart felt. He didn't ask about the doctor's appointment I'd just come from. He just wanted his fix. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button right now. Stories about family betrayal like this one get incredibly personal. And trust me, you won't believe the legal loophole I found to get my life back. Let's get into it. I looked at the hoard of junk Arthur had piled in the garage. Broken lawnmowers, rusted tools, antiques that were just trash. Then I looked at the yellow paper. My brother and my nephew had told me to rot. They thought I was their safety net. They were wrong. That's when I realized the mistake they'd made years ago was about to become my salvation. Before we get into the decades of history that led to this moment, do me a favor. If you enjoy real-life stories about people finally standing up for themselves, smash that subscribe button. I post these deep dives every week, and this one, it only gets crazier. Anyway, back to the house I spent 40 years as a civil engineer. My whole life was about structural integrity, making sure things could hold the weight they were designed for. I built bridges, managed municipal water systems, and made sure the foundations were solid. I applied that same logic to my family. I was the pillar. I was the one who held everything up. My younger brother Arthur was the exact opposite. If I was a solid concrete pier, he was shifting sand. He's 68 now, but he still moves with the aimless shrug of a teenager who's never had a Saturday job. "Julian, you're too tense," he'd tell me, leaning against the kitchen counter while I went over the property taxes. He'd always have a cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth, the ash getting dangerously long. "Life's too short to worry about numbers, man. Just let it flow." "The flow is currently $6,000 behind, Arthur," I'd snap back. He'd just wave a hand, the smell of stale tobacco following him as he wandered back to the couch. "We'll sell some stuff from the garage. I've got treasures in there, just wait." That garage was my father's old workshop. It used to smell like sawdust and honest work. Now, it just smelled like rot and neglected dreams. 8 years ago, the light went out of my world. My wife Margaret passed away after a long battle that drained both of us. When she was gone, the silence in our retirement condo was deafening. I felt like a bridge with its main cable snapped. That's when Arthur called. He was struggling with the family estate, the big Victorian house we grew up in. "Julian," he'd said, his voice cracking with that practiced vulnerability he's perfected. "I can't keep this place up alone. It's falling apart. Dad would hate to see it go to a stranger." I moved back in, thinking it was a way to honor our parents and stay busy. I thought I was fixing a house. I didn't realize I was becoming a life support system. "I'm glad you're here, Jules," Arthur said the night I moved my boxes in. He was already sitting in my father's old armchair, a beer in one hand and a racing form in the other. "You always were the one who knew how to handle the heavy stuff." "It's a team effort, Arthur," I told him. "We split everything, 50-50. Of course," he muttered, not looking up from the TV. But I noticed something that first week. The guest room wasn't empty. My nephew Stephen, who was 24 at the time, was already entrenched. The smell of old pizza and the constant click, click, click of a controller told me the team was already outnumbered. Stephen is 32 now, but if you saw him, you'd think he was a permanent teenager. For 8 years, he's lived in that guest room like a ghost that eats. He'd emerge only when the kitchen smelled like something he liked, or when his internet slowed down. "Uncle Julian," he'd say, leaning against the doorframe while I was trying to eat my oatmeal in peace. "The Wi-Fi is acting up again. Can you call the provider? I'm in the middle of a raid." I'd look at him. Full head of hair, healthy joints, 40 years younger than me. "Stephen, you have a phone. You have hands. Why don't you call them?" He'd just roll his eyes. "You're the one who pays the bill. They won't talk to me. Besides, I'm busy." Busy. Playing a game where he was a hero, while in the real world, his 70-year-old uncle was climbing a ladder to patch a roof leak because Arthur didn't have the knees for it. I paid for his car insurance. I paid for his phone. I even helped him buy a used sedan so he could look for work. Every time I brought up a job, the excuses started. The market was bad. He was finding himself. I should have seen the pattern. I was the engineer, the guy who studied stress loads. I should have known that even the strongest pillar eventually starts to crack under a dead weight. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They were hairline fractures I chose to ignore. It started with the missing utility money. I'd hand Arthur my half of the electric bill, and 2 weeks later, I'd find a past due notice tucked under a stack of his racing forms. "Arthur, what happened to the check I gave you?" I asked, pointing at the red lettering on the envelope. He didn't even look up from the news. "Oh, that? Yeah. There was a mix-up at the bank, Jules. I'm handling it. Don't be so high-strung." Handling it usually meant I ended up paying the whole thing just to keep the refrigerator running. Then there was the car I helped Stephen buy. I put down $3,000, expecting him to cover the registration and gas. Instead, I'd walk out to the driveway and find the tank on empty and a fresh dent in the bumper. "It wasn't me," Stephen would mutter, eyes glued to his phone. "Must have happened at the grocery store." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe we were a family. But every time I looked at the bank balance, the numbers told a different story. I should have checked the bank statements then. I didn't. Last year, the weight finally became too much. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by a hydraulic press. Diagnosis: heart surgery. I spent a week in the hospital and another 3 weeks in a recovery wing, barely able to walk to the end of the hall. While I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped with every shallow breath, I sent Arthur $1,000. It was meant for the quarterly property assessments. I specifically told him, "Arthur, this is for the house. Don't touch it for anything else." "I got you, Jules," he said over the phone. He sounded distracted. I could hear the jingle of a slot machine in the background of wherever he was. "Focus on getting better. We've got the home front covered." I came home 3 weeks later, pale and 15 pounds lighter. I walked into the kitchen and found the sink piled high with crusty dishes and the trash overflowing. But that wasn't the worst part. A week later, a registered letter arrived. We hadn't just missed the assessment. We were 4 months behind on the property taxes. The $1,000 I'd sent from my hospital bed, it was gone. "The horses had a bad run, Jules," Arthur said, not even having the decency to look ashamed. He was sitting there smoking, the gray clouds of ash drifting over my clean kitchen counters. "I thought I could double it and pay off the whole year. I was doing it for us." I sat down, my chest throbbing. The doctor had told me to avoid stress. But looking at my brother, I realized he wasn't just a burden. He was a predator. A few months after my surgery, I tried to stay in my small retirement condo for a while just to get some peace. But the calls didn't stop. Arthur called me on a Tuesday, sounding panicked. "Julian, they're here. The water company. They're shutting us off. I need 500 or we're dry." I was tired. I was hurting. I sent the money instantly. I couldn't have my brother and nephew living like animals. 2 days later, I drove over to check on the house. I found Arthur on the porch, a fresh carton of premium cigarettes next to him. "Water back on?" I asked. "Oh yeah," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Turns out it was just a misunderstanding." I walked into the kitchen and found a receipt on the counter. It wasn't from the water company. It was a betting slip from the local off-track betting parlor. $500 on a horse named Lucky Break. He'd used my recovery money to gamble while the actual utility bill sat in the fruit bowl, unopened and red-stamped. Then came the glimmer of hope. Stephen actually emerged from his room with a collared shirt on. "I got a job, Uncle Julian," he announced, looking proud of himself for doing what most people do at 22. "Security gig at the mall, full-time." I felt a genuine weight lift off my shoulders. "That's great, Stephen, really. Now that you're earning, we can sit down and make a plan. With your dad's part-time work and your new check, we can finally get ahead of these taxes." "Yeah, whatever," he said, already heading for the door. "I'm moving out in a few months anyway. My girlfriend and I are looking at places." "That's fine," I told him. "But until then, you need to contribute. We need a transition plan to cover the property upkeep." He didn't argue. He just nodded and walked out. For the first time in years, I thought I saw a light at the end of the tunnel. I thought the pillar was finally going to get some reinforcement. I was wrong. The light at the end of the tunnel wasn't a way out. It was a freight train coming straight for me. A week after Stephen promised to help, the house went silent. I woke up on a Tuesday morning and noticed the driveway was empty. Stephen's car, the one I'd practically bought for him, was gone. So were his clothes, his gaming setup, and the half-eaten boxes of crackers he usually left in the guest room. I called him 3 times before he finally picked up. "Stephen, where are you? We were supposed to talk about the utility transition today." "I moved out." "Julian," he snapped. His voice sounded different. Gone was the mopey, quiet kid. He sounded sharp, mean. "I'm with my girlfriend. Don't call me about bills anymore." "Don't call you?" "Stephen, I've paid your phone bill, your insurance, and your groceries for 8 years. You said you'd help with the back taxes before you left." "I never said that," he yelled. I could hear his girlfriend giggling in the background. "You're just a bitter old man, Julian. You've been holding that over my head for years." "Oh, look at me. I'm the engineer. I'm the savior." "We're sick of it." My heart did a strange, painful flutter in my chest. "I'm the one who kept a roof over your head while you played video games, Stephen. Your father is broke. If I don't pay the taxes, he loses the house." "Then let him lose it," Stephen screamed. "I'm done with you. You don't do anything for me anymore, so why should I care? Do us both a favor. Just rot in that house. Rot and leave us alone." The line went dead. I stood in the hallway of the family home, the silence pressing in on my ears. Rot. The boy I'd fed since he was in middle school had just told me to rot because the ATM had finally run dry. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. But for the first time in 8 years, I also looked finished. The next day, I was sitting in a paper gown at my cardiologist's office. The air conditioning was humming. a sterile, cold sound that matched the way I felt inside. "Julian, your blood pressure is through the roof," Dr. Aris said, frowning at his tablet. "And your heart rhythm is irregular again. I told you. No stress. Are you following the plan?" I looked at the monitor. The little green line was jumping and jagged, like a mountain range made of my own anxiety. I thought about Arthur at home, probably watching the news and waiting for me to bring back dinner. I thought about Stephen, driving the car I paid for, telling me to rot. "The plan is failing, doctor," I said quietly. "Which plan?" "The one where I keep everyone else alive while I kill myself doing it." I realized right then that I was a civil engineer who had spent 40 years making sure bridges didn't collapse. But I'd forgotten one thing. If the ground beneath the bridge is rotting, no amount of steel is going to save it. I drove home from the doctor's office in a daze, but my mind was working faster than it had in years. I kept thinking about the property taxes. I kept thinking about the liability. And then, like a bolt of lightning, a memory from 5 years ago hit me. It was right after the estate had been settled following my father's passing. We were sitting at the old oak dining table, Arthur, Stephen, and a tired-looking notary. "I want the deed in my name, Julian," Arthur had insisted. He was leaning forward, his eyes sharper than usual. "I'm the one who stayed here while you were off building bridges in the city. I'm the one who knows this house. To protect my interests, I need to be the sole owner." At the time, I didn't care. I had my own retirement condo. I was just there to help. "Fine, Arthur," I'd said. "If it makes you feel secure, put it in your name." Then Stephen had chimed in. "I should be on there too, Dad. To help you manage things. For the future." They had been so smug. They'd looked at me like I was the outsider, the visitor who was allowed to pay the bills but didn't actually own the dirt beneath his feet. Arthur had signed that updated deed with a flourish, his chest puffed out like a king. "There," he'd said, sliding the papers over. "It's official. The house belongs to the real residents." I realized now that in their greed to own the family legacy, they had built a cage and locked themselves inside. They wanted the authority? Fine. But as an engineer, I knew that authority always comes with load-bearing responsibility. He thought he was being smart. He was actually signing his own death warrant. I got back to the house and didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to my laptop. I didn't look at the racing forms or the half-empty beer cans Arthur had left on the coffee table. I looked at the numbers. Total back taxes, $18,000. Property assessments, $4,000. Repairs needed for the leaking roof and the basement mold, at least $25,000. I pulled up my own bank statement. I had enough to cover it, but it would wipe out my assisted living fund, the money Margaret and I had spent 40 years saving so I wouldn't be a burden to my daughter. I looked at the house objectively, as if I were inspecting a failing dam. The hoard in the garage was a fire hazard. The cats Arthur refused to clean up after had ruined the hardwood floors. The structural integrity of the family was zero. I wasn't the owner. I wasn't the debtor. Still, I was just a tenant who had been paying the landlord's gambling debts. "Julian," Arthur called from the couch. "Did you get those smokes?" I closed the laptop. "No, Arthur, I didn't." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my daughter, Claire. Unlike Arthur and Stephen, Claire had actually inherited Margaret's heart. She called me 3 times a week, and not once had she asked for a dime. "Dad," she said, her voice warm and steady. "I've been thinking about what you told me about the taxes. You sound exhausted." Please just come stay with us. We finished the guest suite over the garage. It's got its own little kitchen, a view of the woods, and no brothers asking for cigarette money. I looked at the peeling wallpaper in the hallway. I looked at the pile of Arthur's treasures blocking the path to the basement. Claire, I can't just leave him, I whispered, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. He's my brother. He's a 68-year-old man who is gambling away your health, Dad, she snapped, her tone shifting to that protective engineer's daughter mode. Stephen told you to rot. Are you really going to stay there until his wish comes true? Move in here. Pay us a fraction of what you're wasting there. Save your retirement. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye. I'll think about it, honey. Don't think too long, she said. The door is unlocked. For the next 3 days, I played the part. I woke up early, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, and told Arthur I was looking for remote consulting work. That's the spirit, Jules, Arthur said, pouring himself a bowl of cereal and leaving the milk on the counter to sour. A few more bridge designs and we'll be back in the black. I might even buy that digital camera this weekend so I can finally list the antiques. I didn't tell him I wasn't looking for bridge contracts. I was looking for a moving company. I was looking for the legal definition of abandonment of property for a non-owner, and I was looking for my own peace of mind. I sat there for 8 hours a day, barely sleeping at night. My heart was thumping a heavy, rhythmic warning in my chest. But I pushed through. I wasn't working to save the house anymore. I was working to build my escape ramp. You're a lifesaver, Julian, Arthur muttered as he passed me on his way to the couch for his afternoon nap. I don't know what we'd do without you. I know, Arthur, I said, my fingers flying across the keys. I know exactly what you'd do. He didn't notice the coldness in my voice. He was already reaching for the remote, comfortable in the belief that the pillar would never crumble. I checked my email. The moving quote was in. I had 48 hours left. The final notice didn't come in a regular envelope. It was hand-delivered by a man in a windbreaker who didn't even look me in the eye. It was the intent to foreclose. 90 days. That was the window. I walked back into the kitchen and laid the document on the table, right next to Arthur's half-eaten toast. The red ink at the top seemed to vibrate. This wasn't a past due reminder anymore. This was the bank coming to reclaim the dirt. What's that? Arthur asked, shuffling in with his slippers clicking on the linoleum. The end of the line, Arthur, I said. The bank is taking the house in 3 months, unless $18,000 appears by Friday. He barely glanced at it. They're just posturing, Jules. The tax man is patient. They want their interest, that's all. Besides, he gestured vaguely toward the garage. I'm going to sell the treasures. We'll be fine. I looked at him and realized he actually believed it. He was a man drowning who thought the water was just a heavy blanket. Show me, I said, standing up. Arthur blinked. Show you what? The treasures, the antiques, the things you've been saying would save us for 5 years. Let's go to the garage, right now. He hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for a cigarette. Well, I need to get the proper digital camera first, Jules. You can't take good photos with a phone. The lighting is all wrong. I've shown you the eBay app 100 times, Arthur. Use my phone. I'll take the pictures for you. Let's go. I pushed past him and threw open the door to the workshop. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Musty paper, rusted metal, and the sharp, ammonia sting of the cat's litter boxes that hadn't been changed in a week. It was a graveyard of junk. Broken VCRs from the 90s, stacks of water-damaged magazines, and furniture that was mostly moth-eaten cushions and splintered wood. This? I gestured to a pile of old hubcaps. This is the $18,000? You don't understand value, Julian, Arthur shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. That's vintage steel. Collectors pay a premium for that. I just need time to find the right buyer. You don't have time. You have 90 days before the sheriff puts a lock on that door. Then pay it, he screamed back, his voice cracking. You've got the savings. You're the big-shot engineer. Why are you being so selfish? It's the family home. It's your house, Arthur, I said, my voice suddenly dropping to a whisper. You made sure of that, remember? Your name, your deed, your interests. He went quiet, his chest heaving. He looked at me with a mix of defiance and expectation. He still thought I was going to open my checkbook. He thought the big brother would always fix the bridge. That night, the house felt like a sinking ship, and I was the only one looking for the lifeboats. I waited until Arthur's bedroom door clicked shut and the rhythmic snoring started. A sound that used to represent comfort, but now just sounded like a clock ticking down. So I didn't use big boxes. Big boxes make noise. I used trash bags and small gym bags. I moved like a shadow through the rooms Margaret and I had once filled with laughter. I packed my engineering degrees, my heart medication, and the few photos of Margaret I hadn't already moved to the condo. Every time a floorboard creaked, I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. Thump, 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 thump. A reminder that I didn't have much time left, physically or emotionally. I looked at the hallway closet, my winter coats, my old boots. I left them. I was shedding my skin. I carried the bags to my car in the dead of night, the cold air stinging my lungs. I felt like a thief in my own home, but as I looked up at the darkened windows, I realized I wasn't stealing anything. I was just taking back the only thing left worth saving. Myself. By 3 a.m., my trunk was full. The pillar was packed. Hold up, pause for a second. I need to know, am I the villain here for leaving my own brother to face a foreclosure alone? Or was I just finally choosing to live? Drop a comment below, because I genuinely want to know what you would have done in my shoes. Also, hit that like button if you think Arthur had it coming. Let's keep going. The sun came up, gray and heavy, filtering through the grime on the kitchen windows. I made one last pot of coffee. The smell of the beans usually calmed me, but today it felt like fuel for a flight. Arthur shuffled in around 8 a.m., scratching his belly and looking for the remote. You're up early, Jules. Consulting work must be going well, huh? I'm finishing up a few things, Arthur, I said. It wasn't a lie. I was finishing up 40 years of being the family safety net. I watched him pour a bowl of cereal, spilling milk on the table and leaving it there. For 8 years, I would have wiped that up automatically. Today, I just watched it pool. You look pale, he muttered, finally glancing at me. Make sure you take those heart pills. I need you in top shape for that next contract. He wasn't worried about my heart. He was worried about the income. I didn't answer. I just took a final sip of my coffee, set the mug in the sink, and walked toward the door. I was halfway to the car when my phone buzzed. A text from Stephen. No, I'm sorry for the rot comment. No, how are you? Just, hey, left my power tools in the garage. Don't let Dad sell them. I'm coming by Saturday to grab them. The nerve of it actually made me laugh. A dry, hacking sound that hurt my chest. He wanted his tools. He didn't want the tax debt, the mold, or the cleanup, just the things he could use. I didn't reply. I looked at the house one last time. From the outside, it looked grand, a classic Victorian. But I knew the structural truth. I knew about the rot in the beams and the rot in the men living inside. I saw Arthur's face in the window, watching me. He gave a little wave, probably wondering if I was heading to the bank to pay his debt. I didn't wave back. I got into the driver's seat, my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in months. "Saturday is going to be a very interesting day for you, Stephen," I whispered to the empty car. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The drive to Claire's took 2 hours, but it felt like crossing an ocean. As I pulled onto her gravel driveway, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the family home. It was peaceful. Her house sat on the edge of a pine forest, and the air smelled like needles and rain, not stale cigarettes and regret. Claire was waiting on the porch. Before I even turned off the engine, she was at the door. I stepped out, my hips popping and my heart fluttering, and she just wrapped her arms around me. "You did it," she whispered into my shoulder. "You actually did it." I leaned against her, feeling the weight of the last 8 years start to slide off my back. "I'm tired, Claire. I'm just so tired." "I know, Dad. Come see the suite." She led me up to the space above the garage. It was spotless. The floors were a light oak. The windows let in a flood of natural light, and on the small kitchenette table sat a vase of fresh daisies. No hoarding, no gambling slips, just peace. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. That evening, I sat at the small table in the guest suite with a glass of water and my laptop. I needed to be absolutely sure. I pulled up the county clerk's website and looked at the deed one more time. Owners of record: Arthur Miller and Stephen Miller. I scrolled down to the tax liens. Every single one of them was attached to the property and the names on that deed. Because Arthur had been so insistent on protecting his interests and sole ownership 5 years ago, I was legally a ghost. I had no ownership stake, which meant I had no legal liability for the back taxes, the utility debt, or the upcoming foreclosure. "They really did this to themselves," Claire said, leaning against the doorframe with 2 mugs of tea. "They thought they were winning, Claire. They thought they were locking me into a lifetime of service while they held the title. And now? And now they own a sinking ship in a storm they created. The bank will come for the $18,000. Then they'll see the state of the interior. The cat damage alone will trigger a diminished value clause. If they don't clean it and restore it within 90 days, the bank can sue the owners for the difference." I took a sip of the tea. It was warm and honey-sweet. "They told me to rot," I said, "but the law says the rot belongs to the owner." The phone rang at 6 p.m. on Friday. I was sitting on Claire's balcony, watching a hawk circle the tree line. It was Arthur. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. "Julian, where the hell are you?" His voice was high, frantic, the sound of a man who just realized his safety net had been pulled out from under him. "I went to your room to ask about the grocery list and your bed is made. Your stuff is gone, Jules. What's going on?" "I moved out, Arthur," I said. My voice was calm, a sharp contrast to his jagged breathing. "I told you I was finishing up a few things. I'm finished." "Moved out? You can't just move out. The bank called today. They said if we don't have the first 6,000 by Monday, they're starting the physical eviction process. I told them my brother, the engineer, was handling it. You have to come back." "I don't have to do anything, Arthur. I'm not on the deed." I'm not on the taxes. You and Stephen wanted sole ownership, remember? You wanted to protect your interests. That was just paperwork, he screamed. We're family. You're going to let your own brother be homeless? You told me to rot, Arthur. Well, I'm not rotting. I'm breathing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Arthur's head, trying to find a way to flip the guilt back onto me. Stephen is going to be furious, he finally muttered, his voice dropping into a low, menacing growl. He's coming by tomorrow for his tools. He's going to call the police, Julian. You can't just abandon a property you live in. Actually, I can. I'm a tenant at will who just gave his notice. And as for the police, tell them to look at the name on the front of the foreclosure file. It's not mine. We don't have the money, Jules, Arthur whispered, the bravado finally breaking. You know I don't have it. Stephen's job only covers his own apartment. If you don't pay this, we lose everything. Then sell the treasures, Arthur. You told me you had $18,000 in vintage steel in that garage. You said I didn't understand value. Well, here's your chance to prove me wrong. I don't have the camera. Use your phone, or don't. It's your house. Your problem. I'm hanging up now. Julian, wait! Don't you dare! I tapped the red icon on the screen. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in a decade. I looked out at the woods. The hawk was gone, but the trees were still standing. Saturday morning didn't bring peace. It brought a storm of notifications. My phone buzzed so hard against the nightstand, it sounded like a hornet trapped in a jar. It was Stephen. Where are you? Dad is losing it. Why is the fridge empty? You left the trash in the bin. Answer me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because 20 minutes later, my Ring doorbell, the one I'd installed on my daughter's porch just yesterday, showed a black sedan pulling into the driveway. Stephen had tracked my phone's location. I walked onto the porch before he could even kill the engine. He slammed his car door, his face twisted into that same sneer I'd seen for 8 years. He looked healthy, strong, and absolutely livid that his servant had walked off the job. What is wrong with you? Stephen shouted, marching toward the steps. Dad's crying. The bank is calling every 10 minutes, and you're sitting here in the woods. Give me the checkbook, Julian. Right now. We need to pay the first installment today, or they're cutting the power. The checkbook is for my retirement, Stephen, I said, leaning against the railing. I felt a small flutter in my chest, but I focused on my breathing. I don't live there anymore. I don't pay for houses I don't own. You lived there for 8 years. You owe us. I owe you? I let out a short, dry laugh. I paid for your car. I paid for your insurance. I paid for the groceries you ate while you called me a bitter old man and told me to rot. Well, here I am, rotting in the fresh air. You think you're so smart, Stephen hissed, stepping closer. We're family. You're supposed to take care of us. Family is a two-way bridge, Stephen. You burned your side. Your father burned the rest. Now, no, get off this property before I call the police. And don't worry about the power being cut. The bank will be there to change the locks long before the lights go out. His jaw dropped. He looked at me, then at the house behind me, realizing for the first time that the old man wasn't bluffing. Fine, Stephen spat, backing toward his car. We'll sell the stuff in the garage. We'll get the money ourselves. We don't need your engineering money anyway. We'll be out by next week and you won't get a dime from the sale. The sale? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Stephen, there is no sale. Foreclosure means the bank takes the equity, and they don't want the treasures. They've already seen the photos I sent to the inspector last month. He froze. What photos? The ones of the black mold in the basement. The ones of the 3 years of cat urine soaked into the oak floors. The ones of the fire hazard your father calls a workshop. The bank isn't coming to buy a home. They're coming to reclaim a liability. And since you and Arthur are the only names on the deed, they'll be coming after you for the restoration costs. The color drained from his face. The reality of sole ownership was finally sinking in. It wasn't just a title on a piece of paper. It was a debt trap. You sabotaged us, he whispered. No, Stephen. I just stopped fixing your mistakes. There's a difference. I watched him scramble back into his car. He didn't look like a tough guy anymore. He looked like a 32-year-old boy who just realized he had to clean up his own mess. As he sped away, the smell of his exhaust lingered in the air, acrid and bitter. It reminded me of the workshop. I went back inside and closed the door. I had a 90-day window to watch them try to move 40 years of hoarding. They wanted the house. Now they had to carry it. The 90 days felt like watching a slow-motion car crash from a safe distance. I stayed in the guest suite, my heart rhythm finally stabilizing under the care of a doctor who wasn't fighting my family for my attention. But the updates kept coming. Not from Arthur, I'd blocked him, but from the public records and the neighborhood gossip Claire's friends passed along. First, the power went, then the water. I pictured them in that Victorian tomb, sitting in the dark, surrounded by stacks of water-damaged National Geographics and rusted engine parts. Arthur apparently tried to host a yard sale, but the neighbors complained about the smell and the junk blocking the sidewalk. Nobody wanted treasures that smelled like 3 generations of neglect and cat dander. Every time I felt a twinge of guilt, I remembered the yellow notice. I remembered the rot comment. I realized that for 40 years, I hadn't been helping them live. I'd been helping them hide from reality. Now the sun was out, and the reality was $18,000 of debt and a house that was literally reclaiming its own foundation. The 90 days were almost up. The sheriff was scheduled to arrive on Tuesday. A week before the eviction, a final packet arrived at Claire's address. It wasn't for me, but it was about the property. It was a copy of the bank's restoration order. Because the home was a historical structure in a protected zone, the owners, Arthur and Stephen, were being legally compelled to perform a hazmat-level deep clean before the bank would even process the deed transfer. The cost was estimated at $15,000, on top of the taxes. I sat at the kitchen table, the sun warming my back. I thought about Arthur trying to lift a heavy box. I thought about Stephen trying to scrub the oak floors he'd spent a decade trampling on. I picked up a pen and wrote one final letter to the house. I didn't send it to them. I just wrote it to clear my head. To the Miller estate, I wrote. I spent 40 years making sure your walls were straight and your roof was tight. I spent 8 years paying for souls that didn't want to be saved. Today, the debt is settled, and you belong to the people who claimed you. Good luck. I folded the paper and tucked it into an old engineering textbook. My phone buzzed, a private number. Probably Arthur using a burner phone. I didn't answer. I just watched the clock. 48 hours until the locks changed forever. The sheriff's department doesn't do things quietly. When the day finally came, I drove past the old house one last time. I wasn't there to stop it. I was there to witness the end of the bridge. 2 patrol cars were parked on the curb, their blue and red lights painting the peeling white siding of the Victorian in rhythmic flashes of emergency. I pulled over a block away, I could see the front door standing wide open. Arthur was on the porch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He was wearing an old, chuck-stained bathrobe and clutching a toaster, one of his treasures, like it was a holy relic. Stephen was behind him, shouting at a deputy, his face that same blotchy, entitled red. "You can't do this!" Stephen's voice carried down the street, cracking with desperation. "My uncle is Julian Miller. He's an engineer. He's handled all of this. You're making a mistake." "Sir," the deputy's voice was a low, professional drone. "Mr. Julian Miller isn't on the deed. You and your father are. The lockout began at 8 a.m. You have 1 hour to remove personal essentials. The hoard stays for the bank's disposal crew." I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like damp earth and the neighbors' freshly cut grass. But as I got closer, the house began to exhale its own scent. The smell of 40 years of hoarding, stale smoke, and failure drifted out the open door. Stephen saw me first. He pointed a shaking finger at me. There he is. "Julian, tell them you're paying the taxes." I walked up to the edge of the property line, but I didn't cross it. I stayed on the public sidewalk. The pillar wasn't stepping back into the collapse. "I'm not paying anything, Stephen," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the sudden silence of the porch, it sounded like a gavel. "I'm here to return your house key. I won't be needing it where I'm going." Arthur looked at me, his eyes watering. "Jules, please. It's the family home. Where am I supposed to go? All my things, my treasures." "They aren't treasures, Arthur. They're weights. And they've finally pulled you under." I looked at the deputy. "I'm the former tenant. I have no property inside." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the silver key, and tossed it onto the overgrown lawn. It landed with a soft thud in the weeds. "You told me to rot, Stephen," I said, looking my nephew dead in the eye. "Now you're standing in it. How does it feel?" Stephen lunged toward the steps, but the deputy blocked him. "Julian, you old bastard, you ruined us? We have nothing." "No," I said, turning back toward my car. "You have exactly what you asked for. You have the house, you have the deed, and you have the responsibility. For the first time in your life, you have to be men." I didn't wait for the screaming to stop. I got into my car and rolled up the windows. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was a locksmith standing by the front door, his heavy drill in hand, ready to change the world. The locks clicked shut at 9:15 a.m. According to the neighborhood group chat, Arthur and Stephen ended up on the sidewalk with 3 suitcases, a box of racing forms, and that old toaster. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a safety net. They just had the clothes on their backs and a legal bill from the bank that was already being processed. I drove back to Claire's and sat in the garden. The silence was absolute. "Is it over?" Claire asked, bringing out a plate of sandwiches. "The house is gone," I said. "The bank will gut it. They'll probably flip it for a profit once they scrape the dander off the walls. Arthur and Stephen are, well, they're learning what a budget looks like." "Do you feel guilty?" I thought about it. I thought about the heart surgery, the stolen utility money, and the 8 years of click, click, click from the guest room. I thought about the rot comment. "I feel light," I said. "For the first time since Margaret died, my chest doesn't feel like it's being crushed. The bridge didn't fall, Claire. I just stopped trying to hold it up with my bare hands." I took a bite of my sandwich. It was fresh, simple, and exactly what I needed. The Miller estate was a memory. My life, for whatever time I had left, was finally my own. A month passed. The world didn't end, though Arthur's frantic voicemail attempts, made from various public phones, certainly tried to sound like it had. I didn't listen to them. I had Claire delete them before I even saw the notifications. The gossip from the old neighborhood eventually trickled in. Arthur had moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town, funded by a state emergency voucher. Stephen? He'd vanished. Word was his girlfriend kicked him out the moment she realized his inheritance was actually a mountain of debt and a hazmat suit requirement. I sat on the porch of the guest suite, watching the sunset paint the pine trees in shades of deep amber. My heart felt steady. No more flutters. No more jagged mountain ranges on the monitor. I spent my afternoons reading engineering journals and occasionally taking on a small remote consulting project, one that I actually enjoyed. The money went straight into a savings account for my grandkids. I wasn't the pillar anymore. I was just a man sitting in the sun. And for the first time in 40 years, the weight on my shoulders was zero. The final blow came in the form of a legal notice Claire found online when the bank had completed its assessment of the property. Because of the extreme biological degradation, a fancy way of saying cat urine and mold, the restoration costs had ballooned. They weren't just taking the house. They were pursuing a deficiency judgment against the owners. Arthur and Stephen are being sued for $32,000, Claire said, looking up from her tablet. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of water. 32,000, on top of the 18 in back taxes. They're going to lose everything, Dad. Stephen's wages will be garnished. Arthur's small pension. They'll take a chunk of that too. I thought about the garage. I thought about the treasures that Arthur wouldn't sell because he didn't have the proper camera. I thought about how he'd called me selfish while he gambled with the roof over our heads. They had 90 days, I said. I gave them a window. I told them exactly what was coming. They chose to sit in the dark and wait for me to save them. Do you think they hate you? I think they hate that they can't use me anymore, I corrected. There's a difference between losing a brother and losing an ATM. Arthur doesn't miss Julian. He misses the guy who paid for his smokes and his gambling losses. I looked out at the garden. Claire's husband was out there, teaching their son how to use a level to build a birdhouse. It was a simple thing, but the foundation was right. They were building something together, not tearing each other down. You know, I said, I used to think my legacy was the bridges I built, the steel and the concrete. But standing here, watching them, I think the best thing I ever built was the wall I finally put between me and that house. It's a good wall, Dad, Claire smiled. The best one I ever designed, I agreed. The Miller family home was eventually sold at auction to a developer. They didn't even try to save the structure. They leveled it. 40 years of hoarding, 8 years of betrayal, and a century of family history were bulldozed into a pile of splinters and hauled off to a landfill. Arthur called one last time from a blocked number. I actually picked up. Julian, he whispered. He sounded old, truly old. The house is gone. They knocked it down. Everything is gone. No, Arthur, I said. The house was gone a long time ago. You just finally noticed the rubble. I hung up. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. Life at Claire's wasn't just a change of scenery. It was a total system reboot. For the first time in my 72 years, I woke up to the sound of birds instead of the sharp clack, clack, clack of Stephen's keyboard or the hacking cough of Arthur's first cigarette. My mornings became a ritual of quiet. I'd walk down to the kitchen, the air smelling of Claire's cinnamon oatmeal instead of stale cat dander and regret. My heart, that fragile, overworked engine, began to settle. My blood pressure dropped so much that Dr. Aris actually took me off 2 of my medications. "You look 10 years younger, Julian," he'd told me last week, shaking his head. "Whatever you're doing, but keep doing it." "I stopped carrying a bridge that didn't want to be crossed, doctor," I told him. I started spending my afternoons in the workshop Claire's husband, Mark, had set up. It wasn't a hoard. It was organized. Tools on the wall, labeled and clean. Mark asked for my advice on a structural issue with the back deck. As we sat there, looking at the blueprints, I realized I was finally an engineer again. Not a janitor, not a bank, just a man with a set of skills and a family that respected them. "What do you think, Dad?" Mark asked, pointing to the load-bearing post. "I think as long as the foundation is solid, it'll hold anything," I said. And for the first time, I wasn't talking about the wood. I was talking about us. Sometimes, usually right before the sun dips below the trees, I think about that yellow foreclosure notice. I think about the moment I tossed the silver key into the weeds. People might say I was cold. They might say that leaving my brother and nephew in their hour of need was a betrayal of the Miller name. But I've learned something about needs in the last few months. Arthur and Stephen didn't need my money. They didn't need my engineering expertise. They needed a consequence. They needed to feel the weight of the air they were breathing. I sat out on the balcony tonight, a light breeze rustling the engineering journal in my lap. I looked at my hands, the skin thin like parchment, the veins standing out. These hands built things. They held Margaret's hand for 40 years. They worked until they bled to keep a roof over people who eventually told me to rot. If I had stayed, I would be dead. That's not a dramatic exaggeration. It's a structural fact. My heart couldn't take the load anymore. By leaving, I didn't just save my retirement. I saved the only life I had left to live. I heard a car pull into the driveway. It wasn't a black sedan with a dented bumper. It was Claire, home from work. I heard her laugh, a bright, clear sound that didn't have a hidden cost. I realized then that a pillar's job isn't just to hold things up. A pillar's job is to stand strong, and you can't stand strong if the people leaning on you are trying to pull you into the dirt. Stephen told me to rot, but as I look at the woods, at my daughter, and at the steady beat of my own heart, I realize I've never been more alive. The house is gone. The hoard is gone. The debt is settled. I'm 72 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm not building a bridge for anyone else. I'm finally standing on the other side. A few days ago, I received an email from an old neighbor back at the Victorian. He sent me a photo of the lot. It was just a flat, brown patch of dirt now. The developer had hauled away every last bit of the hoard. It's funny. 40 years of Arthur's treasures fit into 3 industrial dumpsters. The neighbor mentioned that he'd seen Stephen working at a local warehouse. Not a manager, not a hero, just a guy moving boxes. He's finally learning the weight of a hard day's work. Arthur is supposedly living in a senior facility that's a far cry from the family estate. But he's safe. He has 4 walls and a roof, which is more than he earned. I closed the email and looked at my own space. No piles of junk, no hidden debts, just the blueprints for a small gazebo I'm helping Mark build in the backyard. I'm not a monster. I gave them 40 years of my life. I gave them 8 years of my grief. I didn't fail them. They failed the opportunity I gave them every single day. I stood up, my hips a little stiff, but my heart steady. It was time for dinner, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't the one paying for it. So that's the story. It isn't a fairy tale where everyone learns a lesson and shares a hug. It's a story about structural integrity. In engineering, if a support beam is failing, you don't keep adding weight to it. You replace it, or you walk away before the whole thing comes down on your head. I chose to walk away. I'm sitting here now, watching my grandson play in the grass. He doesn't know about property taxes or foreclosure. He just knows that his grandpa is here and that he's happy. I used to think my value was in what I could provide. My money, my labor, my patience. But Margaret once told me something I didn't understand until now. She said, "Julian, you aren't a bridge. You're the person crossing it." She was right. I spent so long trying to be the foundation for people who were actively digging it out from under me. I thought I was being a good brother. I thought I was being a good uncle. In reality, I was just a victim who was too proud to admit he was being used. The Miller name doesn't belong to that pile of rubble and cat urine. It belongs to me, to Claire, and to the family that actually treats love like a mutual investment, not a withdrawal. Stephen told me to rot. I think about that every morning when I wake up and see the sun through the trees. I'm not rotting, Stephen. I'm thriving. And the house you wanted so badly? It's exactly where you left it, buried in a landfill. I'm 72. I don't know how many years I have left, but I know this. Every single one of them belongs to me, and that's how I finally got my life back. Looking back, I don't regret a single second of walking away. But I have to ask you, did I go too far? Or was I just finally choosing to survive? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and rebirth, make sure you're subscribed. I post new stories every week. Catch you in the next one.